Well, good morning, Rutherford County. My name's Andy Kidd. I'm not the usual presenter on here, but I'm very, very glad to be here. Especially glad to be here with a very special friend of mine this morning, my dear wife. We've been married for 32 years, 33 years, and we've been in the United States here as members of the Word of Faith Fellowship for since 1992, and that's quite a story how we came to be here, and that's why we're here this morning to share with you what God has done for us and why we're so excited to be part of the Word of Faith Fellowship. So, Anne, if you want to go ahead and tell us your story.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm very grateful to be here this morning to tell of the miracles God has done in my life and how He's put such a love in my heart for Him. I was born, excuse me, in Northern Ireland, and I was the youngest of four children. Although our family looked very good on the outside, there was a lot of strife and unease and tension in our home, and my early memories are of lying in bed at night hearing my parents argue and quarrel about one thing or another. I remember one time when my mother wanted to leave, she packed her bags, and I was the youngest, but I was the one who pleaded with her and begged her to stay with us, and it really tore me apart on the inside. But I'm very grateful. I'm still grateful because I look back and see that God was there all the time and He took care of us. We went to a denominational church, and I don't really remember much that I learned there. It wasn't a great focus on the Bible, but we attended every time the doors were opened. But we lived one way at home and a different way at church. The church struggled, and to such an extent that when I was 13, they asked me to teach Sunday school because I did well at school and really had nothing to offer and wasn't even very faithful about going to teach the young children. My mom, on the other hand, took us to revival meetings in the town anytime any preachers came in. So I did have a knowledge of being born again, and I went up a number of times and said a sinner's prayer, but there was no lasting change in my life, and I never learned to trust Jesus. I never really felt good enough. I was the youngest of four children, and my brothers and sister excelled at sport, especially my sister, and I had that expectation on me. I felt it all the time that I had to be as good as her, and even though I did okay at sport, I could never live up to the standard that she set. She played internationally at a young age, the youngest ever to play at that age, and I just felt that pressure on my life. I wasn't very happy inside, and as time went on, I really looked away from God because I had a tender heart as a child, and I looked to the world really, and what movies and TV and books told me that I should be. And at quite a young age, I started to want to become someone that God had not created me to be. Before too long, in my early teens, I had major eating disorders. I had anorexia and then bulimia. I tried to be skinny. I wanted to look a certain way. I dressed a certain way, and really came out from all the authority of my parents. I did what I wanted to do, and the consequences were not good. I became very inward and spent a lot of time by myself, a lot of time lying in bed, daydreaming that I was somebody else, thinking about all the people that were famous in the world and that I would be known by them. And, it was just a lot of fantasy. And that was strengthened very much by the music I listened to, the books I read, and the magazines that I looked at. Especially the music. It presented a very negative picture of life that I openly embraced, and that was not God's plan. It was the devil's thoughts. And as time went on, especially with the eating disorder, a lot of hopelessness came into my heart. And although I still looked good on the outside, I did very well at school. I still played sport, although not at the standard that I could have because of the what my body I was putting my body through with my eating. But there was that thing that comes to a lot of people. They want to be different, and I thought I was wanting to be different than everybody else, and I didn't know that God has made every one of us unique and has a special plan and a unique call on each of our lives. But the devil will make you different too. And that's really the direction I went, and that was not good. By the time I was 17, I left home and went to university, and really away from the restraints of my parents, I did everything that I knew better that I shouldn't do, and everything I'd felt restrained from doing at home. I knew enough to know what was right and wrong, but I went full-fledged and did everything to lessen the torment I lived in and try to find some kind of acceptance. After about a year and a half of that, my father had a very bad accident, and it put a lot of fear in me, and it also made me realize that life is temporal, and that it put an awareness of God back in my heart. And around that time, my best friend at high school got to know an American couple who had come over to Northern Ireland basically to start a church. And she asked me to come and see them. And I did. And I when I met them, I knew there was something different in their lives and something that I needed. I told them some things about my life, and they prayed for me that day. And really, I know some fear that I had in my life was broken that day. I changed. I knew there was a change in my life. And after that, I started to take steps back to giving my heart to God. And I got out of a relationship that I never should have been in the first place. And I started to attend. They moved to Belfast, where I was at university, and I started to go to a church that they started in actually Andy's brother's house. It was what we called a house church, and we met there with a lot of other young people. And gradually, there were changes in my heart. There were things that changed. A very significant point, really, one of the miracles another miracle God did in my life was one day in our little Sunday morning group, actually at Andy's brother's house. I told the group, I felt I should tell the group the problems I had with my eating, and could never overcome the bulimia. And although a lot of things had changed, that was not changing. So I told them about my eating habits, and they prayed for me that morning, and absolutely miraculously, I never had the pattern of the bulimia again in my life. And that was truly a miracle in my life, and something I'm ever grateful for. After a short time, I met Andy, and we got married. We loved each other. Knew that it was God's plan for us to be together. And one thing that I see looking back, God had his hand in my life. I still wasn't very happy in the inside. I knew things weren't right. But God was working. The biggest thing was I still lived with a tight control in my life. I wanted to be in control of many areas, and I hadn't learned to trust Jesus and give my heart truly to him. After a couple of years, we had our first child, a beautiful daughter. But it was also the time that major depression came into my life. I was on medication. I went to Christian counselors. I went to psychiatrists. But I wasn't finding any answers. And really, I thought I was a victim. It didn't really make sense to me. I thought I knew God. But really, the foundations in my life were not there that should have been there through the years of sin that I gave to and the patterns. And I was like the foolish man who had built his house in the sand. And when the little bit of extra responsibility came, I couldn't stand. And my life fell apart. Andy took me to a friend's house in the morning. He dropped me off on his way to work, and with my daughter, the baby, and I stayed there. I couldn't be by myself. I stayed there until he picked me up in the evening. And that was my pattern for the next couple of years. There were momentary release from that, but no lasting release. And there was a lot of confusion. But really, I was reaping the fruit of what I had believed in my heart. And so after a couple of years, we had our second child, a precious son. And for a period of time, I did well. And that was the mercy of God in his life. But after a while, things got worse. They were really worse than they'd ever been before. The thoughts that came to my mind were worse. And I really had no understanding of what was going on. And by the time my son was 18 months old, I was really at the bottom. I was very suicidal. We had looked everywhere. We had tried everything to look for help. And he had tried to help me in every way possible. So after that time, I was at the point I hadn't slept for a couple of weeks, maybe more. And I felt I couldn't take care of the children anymore. My mother came to help with the children, and I was really at the bottom of the bottom, very suicidal. And at that time, on a Thursday night, Andy was supposed to be coming to the United States.
Yes, I had a very close friend who I was involved in business with, and I was supposed to be coming to go to the music show in Los Angeles, the NAMM show, and supposed to be flying out on the Friday morning. On the Thursday evening, really, I realized there was no way that I could leave and get on that plane because of the state that I was in. I mean, she wasn't just not sleeping, she was hallucinating, seeing things come through the walls. I mean, just frightening to think of it now. And so in desperation, I just called my friend Ray, who's been with us on the program earlier, and I said, Ray, there's just no way that we can come. It's, I had a company where our offices were in New York, and we were going to be moving those offices down here. Ray had been at the Word of Faith Fellowship here in Spindale for about a year at that time. And so I called him and I said, Ray, he had visited us earlier that year, remember? We had he'd stayed with us for about a week in the October. This was January, and I had seen a very remarkable change in Ray's life. I mean, we'd known each other for a long time, since 1981, over 10 years, and I'd seen an incredible change in his life. And so I reached out to him, and I called him. And actually, let me back up a little bit. On the Tuesday, things were so bad, I'd called our family doctor to see, to explain to him, Anne's gone without sleeping now for 2 weeks. There's got to be something more that you can do. And he informed me, he said, well, Mr. Kidd, I've got to tell you that all of the doctors, the psychiatrists and everything, when we had a case meeting on your wife on this week, and the only thing that we can do more for you is that we'd take her into a mental home and begin electric shock treatment. And he said, and to be able to do that, you have to sign away all rights to her as your wife. The court, the state will make every decision for her. You will no longer have any input or any say on her life. And I was devastated. I mean, we had a fairly successful business. We were living where we wanted to live and everything. And yet there was this incredible torment and everything going on. There was no one I could even share that with. And so that was the backdrop to calling Ray on the Thursday night. And I reached out. And actually, when Ray had been with us earlier that year, God spoke to my heart and said to me, it was like an audible voice. He said, it's through this that your help was going to come. So when I called Ray, that was the fruition of that word that God had put in my heart. I said, Ray, we need help. And he said, well, where is Anne? And I said, she's right here. So he said, can I talk to her? And he talked to her for about 20 minutes, and I'd been talking to her for 4 years at this point in time, telling her to pull up, jerk up, don't think like that, all of that stuff, but it wasn't doing any good. And Ray began to talk to you, and I'll never forget that conversation. And he said, basically, Anne, I don't know everything that's going on in your life, but I know one thing, that you will have to deal with the call of God that's on your life. You have to take accountability and responsibility for that, and that's your answer. And that was a strange thing to me to begin to say, but she settled down, and strange, not strange, but new, and it brought a peace to both of us in such a way that finished the conversation, and I went and lay down in the bed again, and I went downstairs to call Ray back because I knew that we had to come and get help. After what the doctor had told us, there was no more help available over there. So I called him back and I said, Ray, is there any way we could come and get help at your church? And of course he talked to some friends and called me back and said, absolutely. I said, Ray, we'll be in America tomorrow morning. This was the middle of the night. Long story short, we had to arrange all the tickets and everything, but at 8 o'clock the next morning, and I remember the details of this, but Anne was in such a drugged out state through all the prescribed medications, she really didn't remember a lot of it, but at 8 o'clock the next morning, I called my brother. We got through a few things in 2 suitcases with 2 small children in the car and headed off for the airport, which was 3 hours away, 2.5, 3 hours away. There was a flight leaving at 11:30. We got there at 11:35. I told my brother, get the stuff inside. I'll run inside. The Delta desk was right inside the door. And I went to the Delta agent and I said, ma'am, has the flight for Atlanta left yet? She said, it's just pushed back from the gate. I said, you've got to stop that flight. We've got a medical emergency. And so she looked at me a little bit shocked, and she didn't ask anything. She just turned around, took the phone, called the gate and said, stop the flight. We've got a medical emergency. And then she kind of thought, what have I done? And she looked at me and said, sir, who are you? And I told her my name, and she said, would you have a ticket for this flight? I said, yes. And she said, would you have them? I said, no, you've got them, because I had arranged for my secretary to do that for tickets on departure. Inside 5 minutes, we were on that plane. All the Delta people came. I think they put you in a wheelchair. They picked up the children. They carried the children, whisked us through customs and everything, and an absolute miracle. We were on that plane and on our way to Atlanta. And that was the parting of the Red Sea for our family.
Yes.
And we got here on 10th of January, 1992. And
it really was an absolute miracle, us getting here. And we started coming then to the Word of Faith. We stayed with Ray and Brenda. They took us in, gave us everything we needed. We had 2 suitcases, and that was it. And not a lot in the 2 suitcases. I started to get prayer every morning. We never missed a day, and the Word of God was preached. It's a miracle. I don't know how God did it, but I know through the prayer and through His Word, I started to change. And it wasn't an instant change, but just step by step, God started to put hope in my heart. And I was surrounded by the love of God. I had never felt that before. People helped with the children. They helped me. They stayed with me at night because Andy had to travel back and forth to Ireland because of the business. And the love of God reached out to me like I'd never, ever known in my life. After a little while, we had to go back to Ireland. And during that time, really, the devil's thoughts that came at me were worse than before, but there was enough of the Word of God to help me to stand. And Laura Riley, who's been on the program, she laid down her life. She came and stayed with us and helped with the children for a month during that time. Kent Covington came to encourage Andy, to encourage our family. Ray Farmer came to encourage us and just help us through that time in Ireland. And then we came back to the United States, back to the church. I continued to get prayer and really to uproot the lies that the devil had sown in my heart. And little by little, I got stronger and stronger. It was a couple of years, but amazingly, God put a fight in my heart. I'd never had a fight for anything in my heart. I didn't know there was a call of God. I didn't believe in a call of God in my life. I might have heard the words, but in my heart, I didn't believe. But I started to believe. I saw people who had done that. And I was surrounded with people who believed that God would help me. I couldn't convince them otherwise. And I'm so grateful that they continued to believe for me, help me in every way possible. I learned that I can't do anything, but that God is strong, can be strong through me, because I'd tried so hard in my own ability all my life. I tried to be what I thought I should be, and it just wore me out. And I'm so grateful to God. It says in Corinthians that we're daily delivered from sin's dominion, and I didn't know that. I hadn't really known God's word in many, many areas, and I hadn't seen people who every day looked to Jesus to help them and who truly trusted God with their lives. And so I'm very, very grateful for the process that started in my life. There's a scripture in Jeremiah 29. It's one of my favorite scriptures where God says that he knows the thoughts and plans that he has for us, thoughts and plans for welfare and peace, not for evil. And I had known very little peace in my life before I came here, very little. And the peace of God started to come into my heart and help me just every day, every step. After a period of time, we had a third child, again, a precious son, and he's been a great blessing in our lives. When we first came here, I had the two children. Hannah was 4.5 and Jordan was 18 months old. And it struck me right from the beginning. I had never been a place where the children were treated with so much importance. It's exactly the opposite of what the media is saying right now. I'd never been a place where the children, they were so important. And at the church, my 3 children have been loved and cared for and helped. And they are now all 3 grown. They're all 3 married. I've got 2 precious daughters-in-law, a precious son-in-law, and 2 very sweet little grandsons. But I know without being here, my children would not have made it. I would not have made it. Andy wouldn't have made it. I wouldn't be alive. I know that. I don't have any doubt about that. I'm so very, very grateful. One of my children is an attorney. One is at law school. The other is an operations manager at a local business. And God has done nothing but bless us. I love the ministers of God here. I love Sam and Jane. They have done nothing but help our family. They've reached out to us in every area and every need that we've ever had. I'm so grateful. It's been an honor and privilege to be here, that God would have chosen me, picked me out of the wreck that my life was in, and put me on a solid rock. I love Jesus with all my heart. I want to know him more. He helps me every day. I'm just very, very grateful. We sing a song, I believe that God will restore what the devil has tried to destroy. I truly believe that. And wherever any of you are in your lives, I know there's hope. God brought hope to me when I saw no hope, no way out, no way of escape. But God was there.
And I was just thinking of that verse in Psalms where it says, if I take the wings of the morning and go to the highest place in the world, or the lowest hell, even there your hand will lead me and guide me. And that's truly been our testimony, because it's hard to think back today and remember some of those times, but it truly was hell every day, just to live in that torment, oppression, and have no hope. Day after day, month after month, year after year. Mm-hmm. And yet as we look back and we were thinking about what to share, it's so evident. I mean, it's just a miracle how God had a plan for us to bring us all the way from little old Northern Ireland. We grew up within probably 20 miles of Belfast. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that. And that's such a miracle that God brought Ray into our lives. And it was actually through me that Ray actually came to be even at the Word of Faith. It was through a friend of mine that I introduced Ray to in Sweden. And that's such a miracle that God has a hold of every little detail of our lives. And I was thinking this morning, even just that trip back to the United States after we'd been back in Ireland for about 6 months, I'll never forget that morning dropping you off at the airport. It was early in the morning. You had to catch a flight to Birmingham, to Amsterdam, to Atlanta. And you were in bad shape. I mean, I don't even think you really knew where you were going. And here I was as a dad dropping you off, saying goodbye at the gate as you went through security. And who was leading it? It was little Hannah, 4 years old. But God, Hannah had Jordan's hand, and you were holding Jordan's other hand. But God was holding Hannah's hand and all of our hands and guided you right through that trip, you know? That's an incredible trip to make, even as an adult. But as a 4-year-old child, she was really the only one who knew where they were going. And the grace of God was there. And so, you know, what's in my heart this morning is, no matter where you are, no matter what's happening in your life, one thing that we've learned and still learn every day is, it talks about in Job, you know, Job went through a lot. He lost everything. He lost his wife, his family, not his wife. He lost his children. He lost everything that he had. And it talks about it in Job 36, and it says, and if we're bound in cords of adversity, God is dealing with us, and he wants to show us what's truly in our hearts. And that's the story of our lives, that God was dealing with us in his love and in his mercy to bring us to a place where we could know him and come to know the blessings of God in our lives. The life that we live daily, the children we have, the grandchildren. And in Jeremiah it talks about that God set his people free. I took them out of the bonds of Egypt, not so that they could do what they want. And yeah, I know as a young child, you were always looking, you've told me many times, you're looking for the easy, whatever was the easiest thing in life. But that's not what life's about. Life is all about finding God in the hardship. And when you truly find God in the hardship, you won't want to leave him. You won't want to go back to that other self-centered thing. And, you know, that's what we've been able to learn over these years at the Word of Faith Fellowship. And Jim, we're so grateful for, you know, all the wonderful people that we've met and come to know. This is our life over here now. We go back to Ireland occasionally, but there's nothing there for us. God picked us up, brought us the whole way across the ocean, and planted us here, and we love it, you know. And I want to encourage you this morning, when you experience hardship, when you experience difficulties, you can do one of two things. You can complain against God, or you can submit your heart. In Job 36 it says that through submission we magnify God's work. And it was truly God taking us out of that horrible pit that we lived in and bringing us to a place for what he had for us, the peace and the joy of knowing him.
I just wanted to say one more thing, Andy, before. Whenever, those who are listening, whenever you look in the mirror this morning, what do you see? Because I looked in a mirror for years and I listened to what the devil had to say to me about who I was, what I looked like, just a lot of lies. But when you look in the mirror this morning, did you see somebody that God has created with a plan and purpose for your life? That's what God has for us. He has love for us. He's joy. He's peace. And the devil is a liar. That's one thing I've learned. I'm sure of that. But God's word is true. He's a plan and purpose for every one of our lives. And I'm so grateful to God, as Andy has said, for the lengths he went to bring us out to that place of knowing him and continuing to get to know him.
Thank you, Anne. And if you want to find other good news this morning, there's lots of our testimonies on our website, wordoffaithfellowship.org, where many of our family and friends from the church have come and shared their remarkable stories too. And thank you for listening this morning. We are very grateful to have this opportunity to share with you. We're very grateful to God, and just reach out and cry out to him for his help in whatever you're facing this morning. We love you. God bless you.